those biases are hardwired in us, and
Mhm.
how do I undo them?
Welcome to the International Institute for Facilitation's podcast, Spaghetti on the Wall. I'm Eileen Dowse, Chair Emeritus and Director of Assessments for INIFAC. And today I'm joined by Lalith, I'm going to try to get this right, uh, Gunaratne. I hope I got that right. I'm sure you'll correct me. He's a certified coach and a facilitator working with Sage Ontario for mindful leadership. And today, that's sort of what we're going to talk about here. We're going to talk about being mindful of multiculturalism when facilitating. So, welcome, Lalith.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eileen. It's a pleasure to be here. And I love the name Spaghetti on the Wall. I just, as soon as you said it, I just sort of
Just
saw it on the wall.
we'll throw something up there and see what sticks. Let me
Yes.
make sure that I got your name correct, because if we're starting to talk about this whole multiculturalism, I think names are very important. As a facilitator, I think facilitators need to get names right or try. So, would you please pronounce your name for us?
It's Lalit, and I have a middle name called Ananda. Ananda means bliss in Sanskrit.
Ah,
Lalita is in Sanskrit the goddess of love. So I'm the male version of it, I presume. So, and Gunaratne, no, I'm being facetious there. Gunaratne is Guna is good, things that are wholesome for you, and Ratna is actually precious stones. So there are some meanings to my name.
beautiful.
But I love the name Ananda because that's through mindfulness. That's what I'm also
Ah,
working on, finding
beautiful.
bliss.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for being here. And I think a lot of us sort of understand this be mindful, be aware. Now, when we combine that with being a mindful facilitator, that's that next level. And then when you combine that, when working with multicultural groups, what have you found as your experience working with multicultural groups?
Okay, well, there are three layers to that question I see. So the first one is mindfulness. So for me, the practice of mindfulness is the training I have had all my life virtually because I was taught to meditate with the breath when I was 12 years old,
Mm.
and martial arts and mindfulness became another combined practice, which then taught me about emotional control, emotional awareness, and emotional control using the breath. So the meditation practice then is the primary mindfulness practice. There are many other mindfulness practices, of course, is to then train myself to be consciously aware of my breath as much as possible
Mm.
in any given situation. So when I'm consciously aware of my breath, then I am also aware of my surroundings. I'm not lost in thought.
Mhm.
So whenever a thought arises in me, I'm aware of that thought too as best as possible. Unless, of course, I'm in a really stressful situation when autopilot takes over.
Right.
So, and bringing that into the facilitation space is extremely important. So one of the things that I also do is I do some breathing exercises before I even walk into a room. And of course, I'd like to be there before everybody comes, but there are some occasions where I show up and everybody's seated there already. So they own the room, and then I come there. So if I bring in some sort of anxiety,
Hmm.
some sort of stress, I'm going to infect everybody there immediately with that energy. So
Hmm.
that's why I do a few breathing exercises, and I also have a very short practice that I do based on nonviolent communications. I take a deep breath and say, observe to myself, and I exhale, and then I see to myself, what am I feeling right now? As I'm walking to the room, I'm asking myself this, what am I feeling? Yeah, I'm feeling natural. I'm feeling a bit anxious. I'm
Uh-huh.
feeling nervous. That nervous energy is there. So when I shine a light on that feeling, immediately I take the power away from it because I, I became conscious of it,
Yeah.
right? And then the second question I ask myself is, or third question. So first is, what am I observing? What am I feeling? Third is, what am I needing?
Mm.
Then before I get to the room, I say to myself, I need to make sure that I'm calm, I'm collected, I understand what I'm doing. I need to make connections with each and every one of the people in the room and make them feel comfortable. So at the end of the day, my need is to make sure that I made a difference to them in the learning experience that we went through. So when I do that, then I get myself into that grounded space, and the breath becomes the
Right.
foundation. And then as I go in front of the team, I also start observing who they are. I take a deep breath, and even if I'm setting things up, and or as people are walking in, saying hello to them, I try to notice who they are and their body language, and and you notice the people who do not want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So you get these subtle cues when you're aware,
Yeah.
and that's great information and power for you, because you have now,
Yeah.
okay, you know that this person's body language doesn't want to be there, and is it because of me? Were they expecting somebody else to be there? So there are all those things too that are at play. So for me, there's a myriad of things that are going on now in
There's
my
no
mind.
there's no doubt that a facilitator is multifunctional, right? You're, as you
Yes,
say, you're doing the observing, you're being
yes,
aware of your own ability, you're doing the tasks that you need to do,
yes,
either to
yes,
prepare or capture information. And
yes,
as you were speaking, I realized that certainly a facilitator needs to be, anyone needs to be consciously aware, and that we do have emotions. There are some folks that don't like to honor their emotions. We need to
yes,
honor them.
yes.
When we're talking about a multicultural group, and by that I mean a group with diverse beliefs, values, customs, um, meanings for symbols, that kind of multicultural.
Mhm.
And if you take that in emotions, I have to believe that some biases may be easily triggered. So in this awareness, how can a facilitator work with those biases? We always talk about facilitators being
Mhm.
neutral.
Mhm.
That's a philosophical debate for another
Yes,
podcast. How
yes.
can how can you be mindful, honoring your emotions, and be aware of biases for the group?
Great question. And so for that, I do a small exercise in especially if it's to do with diversity and inclusion, a program like that
Mm.
specifically, I invite them to speak. So one of the things that I do to begin with is, if I'm doing it in Ottawa, actually I did a program in Winnipeg a couple of months ago. I asked people to stand from where they were born, whether it's Ottawa or Winnipeg, and to stand in a line from distance from the
Ooh,
city we're in. And
nice.
so everybody stands in a line to the person who
Nice.
was born farthest away. And then I asked them a simple question. So I asked them a couple of questions. So first of all, that brings the temperature down. Even the person who's nervous to be there now has to talk to each other and say, "Oh, I didn't know you were born there. I thought you were born here." Those conversations.
Let me just get clarification. You said it brings the temperature down. Why?
There's always nervousness, isn't it?
Okay.
When
All right.
you and I also know, when we walk into even a meeting or a session or even a training program ourselves, and I subject myself to training programs too, is that the first thing is, well, this is going to be a waste of my time.
Mm.
Or you look at the facilitator and you make a judgment already. So those things are naturally happening in their minds too. And then they try to remember what they forgot to do. So they're in the past and they're in the future, what they have to do after work, the kids, the groceries, so or deadlines, all of those things are there too. So there's a big issue of, am I wasting my time here? I got so
Mm.
much to do here. What am I doing here?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that brings about that inner tension. And
Mm-hmm.
also, when people realize that they are going to be asked to stand up and say something, that also brings about some nervousness, right? Because
Oh,
you're
yes.
going to be put on the spot. There's a spotlight on you.
Hmm.
So all of those things. So there's a myriad of things that are going on in the participants' minds at that time. So my role immediately is to bring some safety, some psychological safety
Oh,
and
yes.
level of comfort into the
Yeah.
room, and inviting them to do that before I say anything. Kind of, they're amongst friends. Most of them know each other. Yes, there are some strangers too, but they're in this situation where they now have to simply negotiate and check with each other. Were you born in Ottawa? No, you were born in Toronto. Okay, you got so that alone brings the temperature down, because
Yes.
now the focus is taken away from the tension to something really mundane, but which is very effective too. Right?
It's interesting you say that. When I do any facilitation training, I share with folks, when you're thinking about participants, when that person walks in the room, they have three immediate focuses. One is, who am I? So that's your mindfulness. The
Right.
second one is, who's in the room? And you
Right.
just did an activity that deals with that. And then the
Right.
last one is, who will I be in this room? So
Right.
if we
Right.
use that example that you have about put people in order of where where you're born or where you're working in this line, I'm going to I'm going to be challenging here. You could also be creating differences. Now, I don't think you are.
Mhm.
I think you will expand on that and create
Yes.
psychological
Yes.
safety.
Yes. Yes.
If we're talking about multiculturalism
Mhm.
and that helping the group work together, how do you avoid separating from differences? You're one of those West Coast people. Oh, you're one of
Right.
those East Coast people. And now I
Right.
can visually see it. What do you do about
Yes.
that?
Yes. Yes. So yes. So no, absolutely. I love the way you frame the three positions in terms of who am I, and who's in the room, and who am I going to be at the end. That's a lovely way of framing it. And yes. So my thing is that we are diverse to begin with. We are
Mm-hmm.
different. So if we accept that with grace, that's
Mm.
one thing, right? So us, in a sense of pride, also saying, look, I was born in Toronto, but not to be attached to it as such, but it is what it is. And there's a certain culture that I bring with that.
Mm-hmm.
Or I was from the West, there's a certain culture I bring with that. And then I ask them, as I ask them to introduce themselves, your name, your job role, what do you do? And then I say, what is your ancestry? To that, it opens up a whole new, for some of them say, I'm seventh generation Canadian, so I haven't really. But let me think about it.
Yeah.
Yes, there was a French mother and an Irish father, grandfather, great grandfather, and so that really brings out some really interesting conversations
Uh-huh.
about, yes, imagine 150 years ago, an Irish Catholic and an English Protestant getting together, right? Imagine the uproar that it could have created,
By
potentially.
the way, you just described my grandparents, so I'm not sure
Right,
how you did that.
right,
That's exactly what happened.
right, right. And I say to them, I said, now look at us here now. It's not even an issue anymore here, right? We've we have transcended all those superficial differences, which are human constructs.
Mm.
And here we are, but we acknowledge it. And then at the same time, some of them say, I grew up, I am. So one woman in one of the programs, she said, all my grandparents except for one grandparent is Polish.
Mm.
She said all the other grandparents are English or Scottish, but I grew up with my Polish grandmother. And
Mm.
she said,
Wow.
so from that, I have a very Polish way of looking at things. My food, what I cook,
Mm.
my sensibilities are coming from my Polish grandmother because I was closest to her. So, so they were interesting so there are interesting nuggets of information that come out in this team of people who really don't know each other at this level. Already you broke down barriers,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? For instance, you're going to
No,
ask me a
no, go
question.
ahead.
Yes, for instance, now there was one situation where a head of these organizations, very strong, a woman who, uh, came across as being really everything together. But she said, my family moved from the Ukraine to the west of Canada, and as I was growing up, I was taunted by other kids. They called me communist, blah blah blah, and I still have those insecurities with me. And she was the head of this organization, and when she opened herself up with that, everybody saw her humanity.
Mm.
Everybody saw her in a different light, and which came up throughout the day, saying that, look, it's okay for me to be vulnerable. It's okay for me to say these things because as you said, my unconscious biases are related very
Oh, yeah.
much to the time that I spent between 0 and 7.
Mm.
And those biases are hardwired in us. And
Mm-hmm.
how do I undo them? So these biases give me a certain sense of insecurity, is what
Yeah.
she said.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with it as an adult because I have the power and the ability to think rationally about things, put it behind me, but that little child in me comes up every so often.
Sure, it squeaks in there.
Yeah.
I love the comment about grace, and it almost sounds like you need to do this 23 and me piece here to say, look, we're all different, we're all coming together, and we're
Yes.
in this multicultural group. And if we go
Mhm.
back to who am I going to be in this group, that then goes into this next level that a facilitator needs to consider, in that you've
Yes.
got this diverse group. Now, how are you going, because of culture, how are you going to make decisions? How are you going to communicate? How are you going to interact? I know that when I'm interacting with people from Saudi Arabia, as a female, I have to interact differently. So, yes, a facilitator needs to be adaptive. How
Mhm.
do you adapt to so many different cultures and approaches? Decision making, somewhat, the hierarchy to make decisions.
Mhm.
Communicating,
Mhm.
they only want to be called on.
Mhm.
What's your
Mhm.
recommendations there?
Well, one of the things that I do then is also to, if it's an organization, a single organization, there's a set of values that they adhere to. It's either written on a wall or it's
Mm,
written in books. And so I go to them and I say, what are your foundational values as an organization?
mm-hmm.
And obviously, there's respect and
Yeah.
integrity there somewhere, professionalism. Sorry about that. So that then becomes the anchor because every culture has
Right.
a sense of what respect means. Every
Yeah.
culture has a sense of what integrity means. But there's also different. There's also, it's a moving target too for some cultures, right? Depending
Yeah.
on on the politics and depending on the social situations, the economic situations that we have grown up with. However, there's a band that we can work within, which what respect means or what integrity means.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do is because that is something that is not personal. It's a set of values that's articulated by the organization, but we are also then saying, is it aligned with my own values?
Oh, yeah.
And that's the other question that comes up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then my own values are based on my needs, right?
Yeah.
So I open up a conversation along those lines. So I tell people to first of all sit down and talk about what are your needs right now as a human being, as a person, first of all, as an individual, and then look at those needs and see whether your needs are aligned with your values, right? First of all, and what are your values
Mm.
that come out from there? Then now that you know that, look at the values that are out there, up there, the organizational values. What are your thoughts in terms of what you expect how you expect the organization culture to be based on those values, what do you expect from your business, from your leaders and managers, what do you expect from your colleagues, and then what are you going to expect of yourself based on this value, right?
Right.
So when you articulate that, and then I usually, so this is the way I create the foundation, by then putting them into groups, and then they can talk about it and find common ground.
And
So even though they're coming from very different backgrounds, like
mhm.
I've had people from Saudi Arabia, I've had people from together in my programs where they find that common ground even though they have
Beautiful.
huge cultural
Yeah.
differences.
I'm hearing so much about get that clarity. And one of the things that I know about the human body is that, go with me here, this sounds like, what are we talking about now? One of the things I know about the human body is that hormones are incredibly powerful, right?
Yes, yes,
To
yes,
for behavior, for whatever. I
yes,
think in multiculturalism, values are incredibly powerful. They're like the hormones for multiculturalism. They
yes,
are really what make you do and think and behave and whatever. So,
yes,
with
yes,
that
yes.
concept of values and clarity, what would be something very important for a facilitator to remember or to learn about when they work with groups who are multicultural?
Being sensitive as best as you can once you know who they are and where they are from. Um, I mean, something as simple as if it's on a Friday and somebody's religious Muslim,
Mm.
um, I I check with them and say,
Ah, yeah.
are you uh, are you going to go for prayer at 12 noon, for instance? So I know. So then they say, no, I do my prayers in the morning. I don't want to distract the class or anything. Some people say, yes, I'd like to. So then I'm informed to break for lunch around that time, for instance. So I
Mm-hmm.
ask those kinds of questions up front too.
Mm-hmm.
So some of them may be just to say, do you have any meetings scheduled during lunchtime? So from that to some very specific questions like that, then makes them feel heard and respected, and that way I also feel comfortable that I have tried my best. And I also openly say now, if if you feel uncomfortable with anything that I do, because even the mindfulness practice becomes uncomfortable for some people,
Mm.
right? I say that up front. I'm going to guide you through a meditation. If you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to do it. If you feel uncomfortable with the whole concept, I invite you to say something now. If you're uncomfortable to say something now, I invite you to come even at a break time and talk to me and say, I don't like that.
That's right.
Right. So that way I'm honoring them. And then I try my best to also inform them that this is a secular science-based practice. And I inform them. And that's why I bring in the neuroscience into this, and I show short videos of Jill Bolte Taylor or Ian McGilchrist, or to show that the practice is not nothing to do with religion. It comes from religious foundations and spiritual foundations, and I'm not shy to use the word spirituality for in a session, right? So, but I say that it is a science-backed process too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for sharing your grace and your insight and what I really hope is some valuable information for the facilitators watching this podcast.
Thank you very much, Eileen. It was such a pleasure. It was short and sweet and very powerful, I believe. You provoked thought in me, and I really enjoyed being here. So I'm on LinkedIn under Lalith Gunaratne. That's the best way to find me, Gunaratne, and my first name is Lalith. And Eileen, you're doing beautiful work out there. Keep your good work. In a time where the world is dividing and separating, our work is cut out to bring us all together in our common humanity. So I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.